Welcome back to the Odyssey Academy, and it is lesson 3 time. So in lesson 3, we're going to talk about the long-term problem. Now, in the first 2 lessons, I've been hinting to you that the long-term problem is the heart of the OM program. So here we are. We're going to talk about the biggest component of what Odyssey of the Mind is all about. On today's agenda there, we're going to talk about what a long-term problem is. We'll talk about the 6 types of long-term problem categories. We'll talk about the long-term problem structure, like how the long-term problem is structured and laid out. We'll talk about this idea called age divisions, how you compete against only other students your age. And then we'll talk about actually choosing your long-term problem. So let's get started. As I've said once, I've said a million times, the long-term problem is the heart of the OM program. It is what teams will spend most of their time doing. Most teams spend months working on the long-term problem. Some teams spend weeks, which seems pretty fast. But the idea is you can be flexible in how long you spend actually working on the long-term problem. But the title, long-term, comes from the idea that it's a long-term engagement. You're doing this for weeks to months. You're actually spending a good deal of time on the long-term problem. So your job with the long-term problem is to basically solve the problem. Now, what does that mean? It turns out that every single problem in Odyssey of the Mind presents students with some sort of challenge. And that challenge is it could be anything. It could be create vehicles, it could be to create a structure. And there are certain limitations. There are certain rules or boundaries in terms of developing the solutions to that problem. Your job is to read the problem, see what is being asked of you, understand what the limitations are, and to present your own team-created solution that addresses that particular long-term problem. Now, the best part, and this ties back to the very first lesson we had, is that there's no one right answer, right? So remember in OM, we believe in divergent thinking, the idea that one problem can have many solutions, right? So it's not like Odyssey of the Mind is looking for you to come up with the one right solution to a problem, because it turns out there is no one right solution, right? So whatever you come up with would be a potential correct solution to the problem. So dream up then whatever solution that you want. Now, the thing is, you have to adhere to the limitations that are stated in your long-term problem, as well as the general OM rules that are outlined in the Odyssey of the Mind program guide. So in a previous lesson, I told you there are 2 things you have to read from top to bottom. 1 is your long-term problem, and 2 is the Odyssey of the Mind program guide. So you know which rules you have to be within when you're developing your solution. All right, so there are 6 long-term problem categories. I've mentioned this. So you have problems 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, which is a little bit off to the side, and we'll see why in a second. So problem 1 is always the vehicular problem. Teams are required to build a transportation device of some kind. As you can see here, sometimes the team members ride on the vehicles and perform tasks. Other times the vehicles are more like remote control cars, like they're that size. So teams aren't riding on the vehicles, but the vehicles still have to do certain tasks or be designed with certain energy devices in place. So that is problem 1, it has to do with vehicles, right? That's the idea. Problem 2 is technical, right? So you're going to be working together with your team to build some sort of technical device built on mechanics, simple systems, understanding the engineering behind a particular prop or device that you've built. So you can see here this hand in this picture, or this ramp that's probably doing things or maybe moving things around. These are machines. They're simple machines that students have built to engage or solve some sort of problem, right? So that's technical. It's more of an engineering, mechanical sort of problem each year. Classics is the 3rd problem. So problem 3 has to do with classics of literature, of history, of art, of mythology, of stories. So anytime a team solves a classics problem, they're going to be really doing a strong performance, but that performance is going to be inspired or motivated by something from history. That's the idea. Problem 4 is the structure problem. So as you can see here, teams are expected to build balsa structures that adhere to certain limitations, so certain weight limitations, height limitations. Sometimes they have to be able to withstand a billiard ball impact, or store ping pong balls inside that stay protected when the structure breaks. So all sorts of requirements that are specific to the long-term problem. But problem 4 every year is what's called the structural problem. Teams will be building a structure of some kind. And then problem 5 is the theatrical or performance-based problem. Problem 5 is very similar to classics, the only difference being there's no historical component that's integrated into the theatrical problem. So it's just theatrics for theatrics' sake, right? That's the idea. So you might have to perform a funny solution, a solution that talks about society, or whatever the case may be, but it's all about performance without any hint of history involved or integrated into it. All right, so the reason problem 6 was off to the side was problem 6 is the primary problem. So the primary problem is designed for students kindergarten through 2nd grade. All the other problems tend to be open for all age categories. Primary problem, excuse me, is only for younger OMers, as we call Odyssey of the Mind participants. And the idea is it's a non-competitive problem. You can come to competition, but they're not going to score you or do rankings for primary teams. And the goal is to just introduce these young students to the OM school program. So again, if you are a student K through 2, or you're a parent of a child who's kindergarten through 2nd grade, this is the problem that they would do because it allows them to get into the OM mindset, understand the components of the program without the pressure of competition. So that's the primary problem. All right, so there you have it, problems 1 through 5, and then problem 6, which is the primary problem. And as I said, every year for the academic school year, the Odyssey of the Mind headquarters releases these 6 problems, right? They'll release 6 problems. The specific requirements of each problem change year to year, right? So one year, classics might require you to recreate a Shakespearean story. Another year, it might require you to use Greek myths to tell a new tale or to create a video game inspired by Greek mythology. So the specifics of each problem change, but the categories and the general themes stay the same, right? Problem 1 is always vehicular, problem 2 is always technical every single year, right? Now, the one thing I mentioned casually a second ago was this notion of age division. So Odyssey of the Mind is divided into 4 divisions. So you have Division 1, which includes students in 3rd through 5th grade. Division 2, which includes students in 6th through 8th grade. Division 3, which is high school, grades 9 through 12. Division 4, which is university, college, and military teams as well, if they choose to compete. And the thing is, here's the important note, your team's division is determined by the grade level of your oldest team member, right? So say, for example, you're a team of all 4th graders. You would be competing in Division 1. If you were a team of mostly 4th graders, but one student who's in 8th grade, that team would be competing in Division 2 because it's based on the oldest team member's age, right? So just keep that in mind. There's a handy dandy calculator for understanding which division you're in if it gets confusing at the Odyssey of the Mind headquarters website, but just know it's primarily based on your grade level. And then of course, the grade level, the highest or the oldest student is the one that determines the division for the team. And that helps keep competition fair, right? Because then it's the same grade level across all problems. If you have a high schooler on a team for a bunch of Division 1 children, then it doesn't make sense because the high schooler has different experiences than a team composed of just elementary school students. So that is your age division. But something else that's important is that all 5 problems, regardless of which one you choose, requires an 8-minute solution, no more than 8 minutes, requires you to provide a performance. So sometimes you think, oh, well, vehicular technical, we're just building cars and technical devices. That is true. But in addition to your vehicle or your technical device, you will have a performance that accompanies your vehicle, your technical element, or your structure in those more hands-on technical problems. And there's also a cost limit for each problem. Now, the specific cost limit varies from problem to problem. So for some of the more technical problems, like vehicle, those cost limits might be a little bit higher because it costs more to get the parts for your vehicle, and then you still have to have money to pay for your performance stuff, your costumes, your backdrops, things like this. So maybe your classics and your theatrical problem, problem 3 and problem 5, have a smaller cost limit. But the idea is all 5 problems have a cost limit that students can't spend any more than that dollar amount in coming up with their solution. Now, this is important because 1, it keeps competition fair. So schools or teams with more resources can't be better off than teams that don't have those resources. And 2, the important part is it allows teams, or really requires teams, to be more creative, right? We can go out and buy fabric at a fabric store and create a costume. Sure, anybody can do that. But can we go out and collect leaves when the leaves are changing and create a dress that's made from leaves, which sounds strange, but a team has actually done that before, right? That would cost us literally $0, right? Maybe some money for the glue, putting the leaves together. But that's the idea of the cost limit, is it forces teams to be more creative in their solution and not to spend much money. So then what's the difference across these problems? Well, really it's in how the points are allocated. So yeah, in the vehicle problem, you're building a vehicle, technical, you're building a technical device, but also those devices get a lot more points relative to other points in that long-term problem. So if I'm a team and I'm competing in vehicle, my priorities are probably going to be on building the coolest, most creative vehicle because that's where most of the points are. I'm still going to work on my presentation, my skit, my solution. Yes, my performance matters. But if you look at the points allocation in your problem, which we'll go over in a second, most of the points are going to be awarded for the vehicle and its functioning and its ability to complete tasks, and not so much the performance. But if we go to classics, so problem 3 or problem 5, the theatrical problem, that's where our performance is going to receive a lot more points, because that's the heart of these particular problems, right? In classics, we're going to get more points for integrating things from history, like famous people or myths, whatever the case may be, because again, the spirit of the classics problem is all about integrating history and the classics into a performance problem, right? So just know that in addition to the problem categories being different, the point allocation is different in each problem based on the type of problem that it is. So you could probably guess in the structure problem, your structure and how much weight your structure holds is where the bulk of the points in long term are going to be, not so much on the performance in that long-term problem. You'll still have a performance, but it won't get as many points because it's not a performance-based problem. Hopefully that makes sense, and it will certainly when we go through the scoring elements of the problem. So here are some examples. These are not the current long-term problems for whatever particular year you're watching this. These are the problems, I believe, from 2019 to 2020. So it just gives you an idea of how the problems work. So you can see the covers, which are created by Dr. Sam, who created the program, by the way he illustrates these. You can see the vehicle problem that year was called long shot solution. The technical problem was called networking. Classics was called the effective detective. Problem 4, the structural problem was called balsa limbo. And problem 5, the performance problem was called gibberish or not. So again, these specifics change. Classics for that year had to do with a detective character, a red herring clue, sort of a mystery theme, which is very different from classics from previous years, where there might have been a Greek theme or a Roman theme or a Renaissance theme, right? So the specifics of the problem change each year, but we know that the classics problem is always going to have something to do with history. And in this particular problem, teams chose mysteries throughout history. So for example, the disappearance of the Mary Celeste ship, and had to explain what really happened, right? That's the idea of how it incorporated a classical element that particular year. So categories stay the same every year: vehicle, technical, classical, structural, theatrical. Problem specifics, the name of the problems, long shot solution, networking, all that change year to year to something new, fun, and exciting. All right, so moving on, in terms of the long-term problem structure, basically what I've done here is I've presented a screenshot of the classics problem from that particular competition year. But on the left side, you'll see the structure of every long-term problem. Doesn't matter if it's classics, technical, structure, doesn't make a difference. You always begin with the problem. So a clear statement of what your problem is in that long-term problem that you're going to solve. Then we're introduced to what's called limitations. This is B. So basically in Odyssey of the Mind, you can do whatever you want when you're solving the problem, as long as it fits within the limitations. Now you might be thinking, well, Jim, isn't creativity all about like being open and not having limitations? Well, it turns out, friends, the people who study, the professors who study creativity, know that we tend to be more creative when we have limitations in place, because we have to be more creative, right? So even though you might be thinking, wait, my students are learning creativity, shouldn't there be no limitations? In fact, that's not true. The science suggests that when there are limitations present, we tend to be more creative. And this makes sense when you think about it, right? If you're in a time crunch or you have a financial constraint, we have to come up with more creative ways to get something done, even in the real world, the jobs we work in, because we have those limitations, right? When the world, when the canvas is wide open to us, we can do whatever we want. There's no need to be creative. So just keep that in mind. There's a learning component of why we have limitations in OM. So we start with the problem, we go on to limitations. The third section, C, is about the site, setup, and competition. So if you're choosing to compete, what will the stage look like? What will the gym look like if you're doing a technical problem? How much space will you have? This allows you to kind of visualize your solution of what you have to develop to kind of fill that space. Or if it's an obstacle course, say for vehicle, what that vehicle obstacle course would be looking like, a diagram of what that would look like. So that would be C. D is super important. This is the scoring. This is how the judges who watch your solution are going to allocate points based on how well you solve the problem. So we'll talk in detail about scoring. It gets its own lesson because it's super important, but that's where it is in the long-term problem. Following the scoring, the points that are awarded to you, come the penalties, section E. These are points that are taken away from you. I will tell you that in OM, it's rare that people get penalties. We're not looking to penalize teams when they deliver their solution, but sometimes you have to keep things fair. So if a team broke a rule or like went over cost limit, so everybody else spent $130 and this team spent $500, well then clearly there's got to be some way to correct that to make that team's competition or solution fair for the competition. So it's rare, but it happens. Also, this happens a lot for the technical problems because things break or go wrong. It's not meant to punish teams, it's just meant to keep competition fair. That's the spirit of penalties in OM. F is style. We've talked about it a little bit, a couple lessons now. We have a whole lesson dedicated to style coming up, but here in this part of the long-term problem is where you'll see the 2 assigned style categories from the long-term problem. You'll have your 2 free choices for each choice of team, and then 5 is the overall effect of those first 4 style categories. That may be unclear right now, but we'll talk about it when we talk about style in detail. In G, we'll talk about what the tournament director will provide. So the day of competition, what you can expect to be provided at competition, which include things like extension cords, audience seating, things like this, space, certain amount of space for you to perform in, just so you know what to expect regardless of wherever your competition happens to be. H are things that that you must provide as a team. So that includes all the list of required elements that you have, a team required list that kind of spells out what judges should be looking for in your solution. All of that is outlined in section H of your long-term problem. And then finally, if there are any words that need particular defining or specific definitions for your long-term problem, you'll find them in the program, or problem glossary, excuse me, tongue twister. You'll find those in the problem glossary, which is section I of your long-term problem. So at the very end of your long-term problem, anything from costume or team created, whatever that definition is, those words in bold in your long-term problem will be defined in the problem glossary. The reason it's important to check that, of course, is that in Odyssey of the Mind, sometimes something referred to as like a backdrop or a prop has a very specific definition that might not be the same definition we use in daily language, right? It's very specific to the OM program. So just to be clear, make sure you check the problem glossary and also the program guide, which also has its own glossary for general definitions that are true throughout all problems in Odyssey of the Mind. All right, so here's a closer look at the effective detective. You can see here the introduction, just kind of introducing the problem. A is the problem. So as I said, that's the statement of the problem the team has to solve. Then B introduces the limitations. So here are all the expected things you must include, and here are the rules on how you can go about presenting those or coming up with ideas for those. Again, in OM, if it doesn't say you can't, then we assume you can, right? So limitations are meant to make you more creative, not to stifle your creativity. Then you see site setup and competition. You see it talks about the stage area, the electrical outlets provided. Let's see, teams bringing cleaning utensils to clean up any mess if they have it. So talking about what the setup is like at competition. Then we get into scoring. So you see how each of the required elements that are scored in this problem are scored. Importantly, you also see what's not scored, right? So like what you might not want to be spending your time doing if it's not getting points. The penalties, we'll talk about these later on, but spirit of the problem penalties, unsportsmanlike conduct penalties, hopefully we don't get any of those. Style, again, we'll go into detail on that, but you can see the 2 required style categories here, which was the use of color red in the presentation and the creative use of materials. Those are required by the problem. And then the team can choose their own, and then they come together for this overall effect of the 4 style categories. We'll talk in detail when we talk about style in its own lesson soon. So let's see, so that's pretty much it. And then of course you have the tournament director providing what the tournament director has to provide. The team must provide 4 copies of its style form. There's the problem glossary as well. So definitions like container, deductive reasoning, what those words mean in this problem. And that's it. That's a long-term problem. Now, I showed you classics. I could have shown you vehicle. I could have shown you technical or structural. They all have the same design, right? So we have the problem identification, limitations, site setup competition, scoring. That structure stays the same across all 5 problems and across the different years. But it's important that we know the problem from A to Z because the specifics within those requirements, limitations, obviously change to fit that specific problem category and that specific problem for the year. Now, I mentioned earlier that Odyssey of the Mind is divided into age divisions. So let's just revisit that very quickly. OM has 4 different age groups, and the purpose for this, of course, is to keep competition fair. We don't want high school students competing against elementary school students or college students. Like that would be messy. It's based on the oldest team member's year in school. So if you have whoever your oldest team member is, whatever year they are in school, that's how your team gets its division assignment. So Division 1, as I said, is 3rd through 5th grade, so primary school. Division 2 is 6th through 8th grade, middle school. Division 3 is 9th through 12th, high school. Division 4 is university, college, and military. Don't forget, there's also an additional age category, which is kindergarten through 2nd grade. It's just that those students only solve the primary problem, right? So that's primary division, which is a bit different from divisions 1 through 4. Most long-term problems, so problems 1 through 5, are for all 4 divisions, right? So division 1, 2, 3, and 4 can compete. There have been some years where maybe division 1 couldn't do a particular problem, perhaps because it was too advanced for that age group. But in more recent years, all 5 long-term problems that aren't primary have been open to all 4 age divisions. So it'll say on the cover of the problem which divisions it's for, but just know, as I said, the recent trend is that all 5 problems are available to all 4 divisions, so it shouldn't be an issue. And again, primary problem is only open to kindergarten through 2nd grade. Okay, so it comes down to now choosing your long-term problem for the year. How do you go about doing it? Well, first of all, you just read the problems, read the synopses. So there are previews called problem synopses that are presented at the Odyssey of the Mind headquarters website, which is www.odysseyofthemind.com. So if you go there, you'll see the current years. It'll say something like 2021 long-term problems or synopses, previews. So go there, click on that, and you'll see a preview of the 6 problems, right? The 5 main problems and, of course, the primary problem. And it'll give you just a brief synopsis, a preview of what that problem is expecting, what the theme is, what teams have to do. It's not the full long-term problem, right? So it's not going to tell you all the details. It's going to give you a gist of the problem. So go there, read those, and just see which one sounds like the most fun to work on, right? Maybe think about what your interests are, right? If you are a musician or somebody super into drama, maybe look at problem 3 and problem 5, because those tend to be more performance-based problems where the performance gets scored a lot more. Maybe you're into technology and robotics and building. If that's the case, problem 1 and 2, the vehicle problem and the technical problem, are super fun and popular to do. Maybe problem 4, the structural problem where you're building a balsa wood structure, maybe that would be something that sounds fun. But here's the thing. Don't forget that if you say you're a builder, you're a robotics person, and you decide to do the classics problem because it sounds fun, or you do the performance problem because you just want to work on your performance skills, you can always include a technical element in classics and performance. And similarly, maybe you're super into drama, you're big into theater, you love Broadway musicals. There's no reason that your vehicle problem or your technical problem can't have a really strong performance where you're writing original songs and making original instruments. Like, you can do that too, right? So don't let the problem categories define how you solve the problem, but just know that the problem categories often let you play to your strengths depending on your own personal interests. All right, maybe you already have some ideas. So maybe you read those problem synopses and you're like, I have a really cool idea for problem 5 this year. So maybe that's one way to choose your problem. Maybe that's the one that resonates with you in terms of solutions you've come up with. Maybe it's about growth. So a minute ago, I mentioned, like, maybe if you're a drama person, maybe you want to be more technical so you can learn how to do more technical skills. Maybe you're super into mechanics, but you wish you had more of a stage presence or better presentation skills. Well, then maybe problem 3 and problem 5 would be right for you because you want to grow that way. If you're a parent or a teacher watching this, that's also a good way to think about how students can succeed or how to grow or shape students based on the problem categories and what they're going to be expected to do. So as I said, go to odysseyofthemind.com to see the current year's long-term problem options. Again, I'm filming this in 2020. Hopefully it lasts for a long time, so I don't have to keep recreating these videos. But these are all universal truths, right? So the specific problems will change year to year. So make sure you go to this website to check out which problems are recent for the current year. And keep in mind, the problems coincide with the academic school year, right? So from about August to the following May when World Finals takes place, those are the problems for that particular year. And then around April of each year, there's a preview of the following year's problems, so the following academic year. That's usually when the synopses come out, previewing what's coming the next year. So there are your 5 options. Go to odysseyofthemind.com, have a look at them, and see which long-term problem you want to solve, right? Super exciting. It's a fun decision that's made because this is what you're going to be working on for the long term, right? That's why we call it a long-term problem, but it's also going to be such an accomplishment. You're going to feel so great after you solve your long-term problem. So real quick, progress report. 1, the 6 long-term problem types, right? Vehicular, technical, classical, structural, theatrical, primary. Do you have an idea which problem you want to solve? And of course, you understand the structure of the long-term problem, right? So from point A of stating the problem all the way to that problem glossary at the end. So you understand what a long-term problem is. Looks like what's up next is learning what creativity is and how to brainstorm. So I will see you on the next lesson.